Good morning, everyone. I'm Courtney Johnson with the Purchasing Division. Welcome to today's session on doing business with West Virginia, presented by Technical Services Manager Mark Totten and Senior Buyer Crystal Husted. It's scheduled to last until 11:30. The PowerPoint was emailed yesterday, so you can print that out to follow along or just follow along on your screen. And let us know if you did not receive that, and we can email it to you following the webinar. We will be answering questions throughout today's presentation. So when you think of one, please go ahead and put it in the chat window and send to the host and the co-host. Let's get started with Mark.
Good morning, everybody. Courtney, thank you for that introduction. I want to welcome everybody here to this webinar. I'm grateful that you all have taken times out of your busy day to listen to us talk a little bit about opportunities for business with the state of West Virginia. We're happy to share everything we can, answer questions, and either be your introduction to the state contracting process or help you get a little bit more familiar with how to compete for and receive orders and contracts from the state of West Virginia's agencies. Some of the things that I want you all to leave here with by the end of this webinar. We're going to start with a little bit of understanding in regard to why the state buys from the private sector in the first place, how procurement within our state agencies works, and I'm going to outline 3 potential strategies for you to compete with in the public procurement process, depending on your business model, hopefully giving you the foundation for some ideas of where to start competing for state business based on the size and business model that you operate in your day-to-day. We're also going to talk about and probably spend the most amount of individual time for my portion talking about how to answer a very important question, which is, what does the state of West Virginia need? And that conversation is going to revolve around a public publication called the West Virginia Purchasing Bulletin. And I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about it in order to make you aware of just how you get connected with this information. And then once we talk about the bulletin, which is the way we advertise, job opportunities for vendors, we're also going to talk about how to use the bulletin the most efficiently for your business, and actually, the different tools that you have, to really flex your participation in the public procurement process. We're going to talk about email notifications, information that we have on our agency's website, wvpurchasing.gov. And one of my strategies is also going to be to talk about opportunities for statewide contracts, which is the way in which the state uses our bulk buying power to procure the most frequently purchased items. Then we're also going to talk about 2 of the programs that I administer here at the Purchasing Division, which is the State Vendor Registration Program and the State Small Women and Minority-Owned Business Certification Program, both of which are doorways to you into the competitive bid process. And then once I complete that introduction, I'm going to hand it over to Senior Buyer Crystal Husted. She's going to take you into a little bit of the nitty-gritty in regard to the contract process and how the different contract types that we award affects the vendor community when it comes to both responding to those different contract types when they're out for bid, and what having one of those different contract types is like. So we're also going to talk about ways in which the state and the vendor community resolve issues that come up in the contracting process. So hopefully this is going to be a well-rounded introduction from A to Z in regard to the public procurement process. So starting out with my half of the presentation, where I'm going to give you this introduction into, how do you compete, how do you become aware, and how can you potentially receive an order or a contract from a state agency. Let's talk about why we're here in the first place. Why does the state of West Virginia with its tens of thousands of employees, need to procure so many goods and services from the private sector? The answer to that is, some of the things that our agencies buy from the private sector in order to fulfill their mission, it wouldn't be cost effective for us to manufacture or produce those things on our own. So in those cases, for efficiency's sake, we go to the private sector to buy certain things that the state needs all the time. And by doing that, especially on a statewide basis, West Virginia's agencies have the opportunity to harness our bulk buying power to get the lowest possible price for things like paper, fuel, vehicles, the computers, office supplies, things of that nature. Common commodities that more or less all agencies are going to need to operate regardless of their mission. And we're going to talk a lot about, the basics of that. Now, in addition, and we hope this never happens, but unfortunately it does, many state agencies go to the private sector on short notice in the case of emergency situations. And in purchasing, we define an emergency as an instance where life or property is at stake. So this could be either there's been a mountain slide, an act of God, a flood, trees are down on top of the road in a state park, things like that. In instances like that, the agency will be authorized to go directly to the private sector to procure the services they need to solve that problem. And the conversation that what I'm trying to communicate to you all is in those situations, it's going to be advantageous for agencies to know who you are and that you are out there available for that work prior to that emergency happening. And one of the strategies I'm going to talk about is going to detail how to market yourself and introduce yourself to the employees in state government that we call procurement officers. So I want to introduce the emergency situation now. So when I'm talking about marketing yourself to state agencies, that you do so not just in the context of routine purchases, but also so they know that you are available to assist in an emergency if that is the type of business you're into. Now, talking about the ways in which we as agency buyers procure goods and services from the private sector, there's a few things I want to introduce to you in regard to our procedures that are going to affect the way in which you would respond or market yourself to the state of West Virginia to increase your business. And I don't want to go into like a civics lesson here, but there is one thing that I want to describe, which is a threshold for state bidding. The most important figure for you to know in regard to how we buy things is the $50,000 threshold. And whether or not something an agency needs is expected to exceed 50,000 or be below 50,000 is going to depend on how we go about buying it. If something the state needs is expected to be under $50,000, then it's going to be procured at the agency delegated level, which means the agency with the need, whether it be DNR, highways, corrections, whatever agency, under 50,000, they're going to be doing it on their own authority. Now, for the vendor community, that means that if and when you respond to that advertisement, you would send your bid directly to that agency. That's the most important part for you to know, where to actually send your bid. Now, if the procurement is expected to exceed 50,000, that means it's going to be going through a little bit more formal of bid process. And anything expected to exceed 50K is going to be administered by my office, the purchasing division. And the most important part of that for you all to remember is if and when you're responding to those advertisements, you send your bid to us here at the purchasing division, which is Building 15 of the Capitol Complex. So above and below 50,000 is really the most important difference for you to know. That's the first thing I want to introduce. Now, hopefully already you are imagining the potential transactions you might have with the state and whether or not they would be over or under 50,000, because chances are, knowing what you know about your business, you can already guesstimate whether or not your individual transactions with the state would be over or under this threshold. Now, if what you are in business to do most typically costs under 50,000, that's fine. You can make that area of spend your bread and butter very easily, because you can make just as much money with multiple 50,000 or under transactions than you can with one big over 50,000 transaction. Now, we'll talk a little bit about strategies in detail, but if your world of transaction average amount is under that 50K threshold, you can market directly yourself to the state agencies that have a need for your goods and services, and that can be the world that you operate in, and you would never directly send a bid to the purchasing division. There's some information that we provide in order for you to be able to get in touch with these state agencies. Like, we have a list of procurement officers on our website, which is the list of all the employees at each state agency who are responsible for purchasing for their agencies, and their contact information is there as well. That's a little bit of that's the rundown of the over or under $50,000 threshold. Now, if going back to those of you that might be operating largely in the under $50,000 world, within that area of spend, there's thresholds that dictate the formality of competing in that world. Now, if what you provide to the state would on average be under $5,000, then the agency can send orders to you and they don't even have to bid it out, because at that small dollar threshold, our procedures do not, shackle the agency with a lot of bureaucracy. Under 5,000, they can just buy whatever they need from you without bidding it out. Now, something over $5,000 and up to $20,000, we do need the agency to insert some competition into that procedure. But all agencies have to do is get verbal bids from vendors in that threshold, and then award to the lowest bidder meeting specifications. So now in this situation, you really want agencies to know who you are so they can call you and get that quick verbal price. Again, not a lot of work on your end. You can provide verbal quotes all day, hopefully, and then eventually be successful. And then over 20,000 and up to 50,000, an agency would also need to solicit bids. In this case, they would need to be in writing. But what I'm trying to illustrate here is in the under $50,000 world, agencies have a lot of autonomy and empowerment for getting what they need without a lot of extra steps, because we're talking about ultimately a small dollar threshold, and we want the agencies to be able to procure this quickly. Then, of course, something expected to be over 50K comes through us at the purchasing division, which we'll go into more detail later in this presentation. So let's Let's start talking about the first strategy that I want you all to keep in mind for doing business and pursuing business with the state of West Virginia's agencies. And the first strategy is simply, how do you find out what each state agency needs? And the most important thing I could tell you, and maybe the most important thing of the entire morning, is that the state of West Virginia's agencies advertise what they need when it's expected to exceed 20,000 in a public publication called the West Virginia Purchasing Bulletin. And you can find the West Virginia Purchasing Bulletin on a website called wvoasis.gov. And when you click VSS on that website, it's going to take you to a portal that contains the bulletin where anything a state agency needs over 20,000 at any given time is going to be advertised. There you can make a user ID for this portal, but you don't have to. So just for you to be able to connect with potential project opportunities with a state agency, you don't need a password. You don't need to get through a firewall. You can just go to wvoasis.gov, click VSS, click View Current Solicitation Opportunities, and you're looking at a list of things that all of our agencies need in all 55 counties. Now, if you do decide to make a user ID in this portal for your company, then you're going to have a lot of advantages when it comes to pursuing state business long term. And I'll talk a little bit about the benefits to you for making a user ID as we go along here. But you really don't have to make that user ID if you just want to read about the project opportunities that you have at your disposal in the bulletin. And one thing that I'll mention, even though I'm going to talk about our vendor registration program here at the purchasing division, you don't have to register with any state agency just to submit a bid to one of these advertised opportunities. So whether or not you are giving an agency a verbal bid, a written bid, or responding to a larger project that's advertised in the West Virginia Purchasing Bulletin, you don't have to go through any agency's registration process. At this point in the process, we are just trying to encourage as much competition as possible from the vendor community. So it wouldn't be advantageous to us if we threw a bunch of registration requirements to you at this stage, when really we're just trying to get prices for the work. So no matter what's communicated to you later, you can get all the registration requirements handled later if you're the successful vendor. You don't have to go through it just to bid. Now, here's what the West Virginia Purchasing Bulletin looks like on that wvoasis.gov website. And hopefully it shows up clearly on your screen in this webinar. But you can see here, the first thing you see is a list of projects that are currently out for bid. You see a brief description of what it is, what agency has that project out for bid, the contact person at the agency, and there's also a button you can click to respond online. Though in most cases, you can also submit a bid on paper if you're more comfortable with that. And there's no competitive difference whether you submit your response on paper versus electronic, as long as the agency allows paper responses. So don't feel like you're obligated to respond electronically just to be considered, because there's very few agencies that won't take a paper bid. And for us at the purchasing division, in that over $50,000 world, we're going to take either a paper or an electronic response, and we're going to evaluate it the exact same way. Now, one thing that I'll point out since we're on this screen, I mentioned that over or under $50,000 world that indicates whether an agency or the purchasing division is administering the solicitation. there's a quick, even though it really doesn't matter to you at this stage, when you're just browsing, whether it's being bid out by purchasing or the agency, you can quickly glance at the project number on each of these lines, and there's going to be a prefix like C, ROI, ARFQ, something of that nature. There's going to be a 4-digit lettered prefix for each project. That's either going to begin with an A or a C. And if you want to see at a glance if something is being bid out by purchasing over 50,000 or by the agency under 50,000, if the prefix starts with an A, it's being bid out by the agency and is expected to be under 50K. If it starts with a C, it's being bid out by us at the Central Purchasing Division, and it's expected to exceed 50,000. So if you wanted to know that information this early in the process, you can do so by looking at that. Now, I will point out, if in case you're especially if you're wondering right now, you do get more information about the project itself than the one line of descriptive language that you see here. And here in a moment, I'll take you into the details of each solicitation. If you were to go and click the blue link beside each of these projects, it's the blue link is the project number. But before I do that, I'm going to tell you a way in which you can search the purchasing bulletin, because, you know, when you start looking through page after page of this, you may not see anything that's relevant to you for a while. And I know that you all are not in business to read the West Virginia Purchasing Bulletin all day. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how you can go a little bit more directly to solicitation opportunities that are relevant to your business. And the portal is going to let you search by keywords. So whatever you're in business to do, you can type in a few brief words that describe, you know, what you would potentially do for the state. And I encourage you to keep those search terms as brief as possible. In the example that I'm showing here, the search terms I use are just 2 words, like phone system and building maintenance. And the reason I strongly advise you to keep your potential keyword search terms short is because the search portal in the purchasing bulletin at wvoasis.gov, it's not quite as instinctive as, say, Google would be. You know, when we Google something, we can probably get to what we need if we give a halfway decent description. And that's not so the case in the purchasing bulletin search portal. So I'm going to tell you how to overcome that. Let's say you are searching for building maintenance or phone system. If you go to that website and do so, the system's going to automatically put wildcards on each end of your search terms. Now, what do I mean by wildcards? The system will apply asterisks to the front and to the end of your words like phone system. And what I encourage you to do is to also put an asterisk between those words. So if you can see here in my little screenshot of the search box, I've put asterisks throughout all of the search terms I've used in the example. And what that does for you, let's say that you're searching for a phone system, but the way the potential solicitation you want to see is listed in the bulletin. Let's say it's written in the bulletin as phone and fax system. Well, if you just put in phone system, you're potentially eliminating yourself from finding that. But if you put in phone system with an asterisk in between the words, then the system search is going to cast a wider net for you to find phone and fax system or phone and voice over IP system. However it's written, adding those additional asterisks are going to keep you from eliminating matches that you want to see. And really, this first strategy that I'm talking about, this is all about connecting you with the information so you're aware of what the state needs. And the way that I have prepared this content is in the context of giving you every way possible to find out something that is relevant to you currently in the West Virginia Purchasing Bulletin. Now let's talk about that user ID that you can create in the vendor self-service portal at wvoasis.gov. You can make a user ID for your company on this website for free. And you don't even have to register with a state agency yet. This is just a matter of creating a user profile for your company with your company's basic information. And then it's saved and ready to go at any point if you want to respond to a solicitation online. In some cases, when you're responding to a solicitation, it could take some time. So, and depending on how much time is left on that advertisement, you may want to get the most out of every minute you have left. So creating this user ID for your company and just getting your basic info like your name and address saved in the system could save you a little bit of time and make sure you can, and when a relevant advertisement comes up, then you're ready to go and start your online response if you choose to do so. Now, creating this user ID does not register you with any state agency. It's just a matter of getting your company's info saved in the portal. Even though when you create that user ID, you get an automatic email that says, congratulations, you're now registered. That's just referring to whether or not you are saved in the vendor self-service portal, just to let you know. But again, at this time, it's not required that you start registering with state agencies. You're just browsing for opportunities right now. But if you do choose to register, let's say you want to go ahead and register with our vendor registration program at the purchasing division, you can do so online in this portal by completing all the info we need about your company and paying the $125 registration fee. But again, that is not required to just submit a bid. Now, if you make that user ID in that profile, here's some of the things you have at your disposal. The screenshot on the left is giving you a preview of the dashboard that you have. And you can see that as soon as you log in, that's what you see. You see basic information about your company, and then you also see a list of announcements on the right that are kind of giving you some information about what's happening with the system, what's happening with state agencies, etc. And then the screenshot on the right is showing you some of the tools you have if you make this user ID in the system. One of the tabs is where you can set up other logins for other employees at your company if you want more than one person to be able to access this portal and browse for opportunities. And you don't even have to give everybody the security access to respond on behalf of your company. You can control access levels for the different user IDs you set up. You can also add different addresses. Let's say you have multiple branches. You can start adding the ordering address for the different branches for your company in preparation for the potential business you're going to do with state agencies. The tab that I have highlighted here in the rightmost screenshot is called commodities, and that's something that I'm actually going to talk a little bit about because it's a really valuable tool for you to connect yourself with potential bid opportunities. And as I mentioned before, I know that you are not in business to read the purchasing bulletin all day long. And in addition to, looking at it from time to time and maybe searching by keyword, you can also sign yourself up for specific commodity alerts. If you have an email address and if there is a perfect match between the commodity code that you enter and what a state agency has indicated they need. If you put in commodity codes relevant to what you're in business to do, that could potentially result in an email alert when a specific opportunity comes out. Now, Now, you may be, if you're new to public purchasing, you may be asking, well, what's a commodity code? And that's simply a classification number that's going to describe just about everything on earth that can be manufactured and sold. So whatever you're in business to do, there's going to be one or more commodity codes that correspond to that particular good or service that you're in business to sell. Now, the other advantage to entering commodity codes in this portal is sort of comes to how state agency procurement officers can go about finding you. And state agency procurement officers have tools at their disposal that let them search this registration information for specific commodities they need. So an agency may type in a commodity code in this tool for a certain thing they need. And if you've got the information saved in your VSS profile, then your name is going to come up as a potential supplier. So even if you don't want these email alerts, even if the email alerts, don't work as well as you want to every time, an agency can find you as a potential supplier if you've got a robust commodity code description, a robust list of commodity codes saved in your vendor self-service portal record. And really, I'm happy to talk as much about that as you want because it's a really invaluable way of the state finding you through this data or you finding potential bidding opportunities. Now, I'm here in the West Virginia Purchasing Bulletin, and I mentioned to you that I was going to show you some more information about each job than the single line description that you see in the first page of the Purchasing Bulletin. So the screen we're looking at now, what I am showing you is what you get to view after you've clicked the blue link on a specific project if you want to see more information about that advertised job opportunity that an agency has out for bid. And when you click that project number, you're brought to a page like this that shows you more information about who has the job out for bid, when bids are due, and the tab that's highlighted here on your screen is for attachments. And the attachments on a solicitation are going to be the nitty-gritty of everything from terms and conditions to parts numbers that the agency needs, maybe the design for a building, the description of construction, whatever this job out for bid is about, it's going to be described in great detail here for you so you can craft the most specific and competitive response that you possibly can. There might be Excel documents of what we call price sheets, and maybe you have to go through a list of part numbers for widgets and give your price for each one. Or maybe there's architectural diagrams for something that you would review and indicate to the state how much it would cost for you to build it. Just whatever it is, it's going to be in these attachments. And not to get ahead of senior buyer Crystal Husted, but you're going to want to read all of these attachments in detail if you are going to consider responding to this opportunity that an agency has out for bid. Because everything that you would need to know is going to be detailed here in the attachments. Now, this may be too small to read, but this is just more information about a particular project opportunity, who has it out for bid, when responses are due, what agency has it out for bid, and contact information, things like that. Now, I mentioned those commodity codes and how valuable of a tool it is for the state connecting with suppliers, and you as the supplier community connecting with state agencies in regard to what it is you're actually in business to do every day. And the state of West Virginia uses the Commodity Code Library from the United Nations, called the United Nations Standard Products and Service Codes. And if you want to look up which commodity codes actually correspond to what it is you're in business to do, you can go to the website that's listed in that last bullet, unspsc.org. And on that website, which I've got screen shotted on the right, you can type in what it is you provide to your customers, whether it's steel, gravel, construction, consulting, whatever. You can look up commodity codes on that site, save the numbers, and then take those numbers from the United Nations website back to the vendor self-service portal page here under this commodities tab, and hopefully you can see it on your screen. To the far right here is a blue button that says Add Commodity Services. And if you want to build up the list of commodity codes relevant to your business in your State of West Virginia Vendor Self-Service Portal record, just click that blue button and enter those codes that you get from the United Nations website, unspsc.org, and they'll be saved in your vendor record indefinitely. And that's not only going to set you up to potentially receive email alerts, but more importantly, when an agency procurement officer goes to their tools that we have on our side and searches for who can provide this good or service for my agency, you're going to come up in that commodity match if you've got your information from the United Nations site saved in your record with the state. And everything I'm describing up to this point, it's free. We're not charging you for anything yet, because at this point we're just trying to get as many vendors as possible connected with the information and the bid opportunities that are out there in the 55 counties. So that is the end of the first strategy that I'm going to describe, and that's the longest. Just to give you all some relief, that's the longest strategy I'm going to go into detail about. But I feel that it is important for you all to know what the state needs, because otherwise, how are you going to know what to bid on or where to go to get the information? To me, that's the most important step here, is you all just knowing what options you have for doing business with West Virginia. So the second strategy, we're going to get a little bit into, this is another option for you to become aware of bidding opportunities that are out there. And this is especially relevant to vendors in the audience here. If you think that most of your potential transactions with West Virginia's agencies are going to be in that under $50,000 world. Because remember, in the under $50,000 world, for some pieces of that spend, an agency can go to a vendor directly. An agency can ring you up and get a verbal bid for, 17 widgets or some service. Or agencies have the power to just get 3 quick written bids from vendors for part of that under $50,000 threshold. In all of those cases, you want the relevant state agencies to know who you are, where you are, and what you can do for them. And you can introduce yourself to state agencies by making sure the procurement officers are aware you're out there and that you stand by to provide your goods or services to them. And whether they like it or not, the agency procurement officers are listed on the Purchasing Division website at that link you see at the very bottom of this slide. And just scroll down until you see a button that looks like, the button that we've pictured here. It says Procurement Officer Listing. On that Procurement Officer listing, there's over 100 state agencies there. And you probably don't have time to introduce yourself to 100 agencies, but Just think about how you might get started doing business with West Virginia. Find 5 or 6 agencies that you think, their mission is really going to depend on having the product or service that you sell. Uh, Introduce yourself to them. Make sure they know you're out there to provide a bid someday. And what I suggest to vendors, send a one-page who, what, where uh, about your products and services to the agencies you think are going to have that need someday. It may not be tomorrow that they go to you for a bid, but next time an agency has a need, or God forbid, the next time that agency has an emergency situation where life or property is at stake, they'll know you're there and may potentially call you for a verbal or written bid for the thing they need the next time that need arises. Now, let's say you want to really do your homework about what the state needs and and very importantly, what your competition might be like. There's a lot of information on my agency's website, wvpurchasing.gov, in regard to the 3 stages of any state vendor transaction. And I'm going to break down the trifecta here of the state making a purchase, which is what the state needs, which we've already talked about with the West Virginia Purchasing Bulletin, what offers have been made by the vendor community. In other words, you and your competitors are all offering a price. And then the third and final stage, who was the ultimate successful vendor? Um, there is there is a tremendous amount of data about this trifecta on our website when it comes to past solicitations that my agency has administered. Um, Now, what relevancy is there to you when it comes to knowing what the state bought in the past, who bid, and who won? What if you're if you want to compete in the future for something that's been purchased in the past, if it's even if it's not currently out for bid right now, go to the transparency section of our website um, and look up. Sorry, I was reading a question there for a moment. I'm gonna come back to that question in just a moment. On our website, you can look at something an agency bought in the past through that bulletin portal. And let's say you want to have an idea of what that solicitation is going to be in the future. Look at what the solicitation documents were the last time the state bought it. That'll kind of give you an idea of how it might go out for bid in the future. Now, definitely read the future solicitations details, but if you're new to this process, you can kind of get a peek at what past purchases have looked like. And then a lot of vendors tell me that they study this. They look at something in the past and they see how many vendors responded and what vendors responded. And it's probably not a secret that in your business model, you know who your potential competitors are going to be. Uh, Anytime a bid is submitted to the purchasing division, after those bids are opened, that becomes public information. And we've got that posted on our transparency section. So you can actually go and see uh, the last time something was bought relevant to you. You can see, did 2 people bid on it or did 20? And what did their crafted responses look like? And then we also have an award report that shows who was ultimately successful. So if you really want to do that homework and sort of study what's been done in the past, it's on our website for transparency purposes to the citizens of West Virginia. But it can also be valuable research for you if you're really wanting to have that competitive edge for future bidding. And the transparency section you can get to through our main page, wvpurchasing.gov, or there's a direct link there at the bottom of this slide. So let's go to my third and final strategy for competing for business with West Virginia. And again, these 3 strategies are not the only strategies you have at your disposal. These are really just the most common paths to opportunities that I've identified through my 15 years at the purchasing division working with the vendor community. So you may get a state contract a fourth, fifth, or sixth way. I'm just laying out three of the what I think are the most common strategies to give you some ideas on what might fit your business model. This third strategy I'm going to detail is a little bit more of a long-term pursuit with potentially high yield results. And these are statewide contract opportunities that are available for the most frequently purchased commodities that I talked about a little bit at the beginning. But what a statewide contract is, for the things that all agencies need, and I'm talking the most frequently purchased commodities: paper, furniture, computers, vehicles, fuel, for the really common goods and services that most, if not all, state agencies are going to need to just operate. We bid all that out together here at the purchasing division, and we harness the expected spend in an entire year, for example, into one contract. And let's just go with paper because that's easy to visualize. The purchasing division will calculate how much paper the state of West Virginia is going to need in a year across all 55 counties. And we'll bid that out into one contract. And to use a little bit of national purchasing vernacular, for these statewide contracts, for the most part, we're a single award state, which means in most cases, if you receive a statewide contract from West Virginia, you're going to be the exclusive supplier for that commodity for the duration of that contract. So a successful statewide contract vendor may be the exclusive supplier for paper or computers for all state agencies in the 55 counties. Now, since there's only one successful vendor at a time, that means we can't add you to a statewide contract tomorrow. But let's say the statewide contract for a commodity you might be able to provide expires in 3 months or 6 months. Go to our website and look at the active statewide contract list. See if there's something that you can provide to the state that's listed here. There's a lot of different goods and services that we have these contracts for. And look at the contract documents themselves, which are also posted here under each project, and see when the contracts expire. That gives you some time to do your homework, go over to our transparency section and see what the bid documents look like and who responded. And if this is a pursuit that you really want to take seriously, start prepping for whenever this goes back out for bid again. So it's a long-term pursuit, to actually win a statewide contract, because they don't go out for bid every time the state needs a ream of paper. But, when they come up for bid, it's potentially a big opportunity for your company. And when we've got all the information available for you to prep and prepare to compete for a statewide, which again, potentially high yield for your business. So those are kind of my three high-level strategies for competing with the state. Now, since I administer the vendor registration program at the purchasing division, I'm obligated to tell you a little bit about our program, which is a registration that would be required if you become the eventual successful vendor for a contract. Now, you do not have to register with purchasing division just to bid, as I said before, but if you are the apparent successful vendor for a state contract or order, you potentially need to pay a $125 fee to the purchasing division, and you definitely need to provide some information to the purchasing division about your company so we know who is receiving taxpayer-funded orders. And the most important piece of information we need about your business, other than things like your legal name and your physical address, we need to know your current active federal tax ID. But that plus a registration fee of $125 that's going to put you in full compliance with purchasing division to receive any amount of orders or contracts from state agencies for the course of 1 year. So we need some info about your company and the fee, and then you can do business with state agencies all day for a year. And this is some of the stuff we need to know. Most of it's basic information like your phone number, your address, your legal name, and that tax ID. And then if you can look it up on the Dun & Bradstreet website, we also like to have your Dun & Bradstreet number on file. It's not required, but we would like to have it in the system just for the sake of connecting with the information that provides us about your company. And chances are you do have a Dun & Bradstreet number, whether you know it or not. You could look it up on the Dun & Bradstreet website there if you're not sure what your DUNS number is. Now, in addition to completing the registration process with agencies, we're also happy to help identify you with specific bid opportunities in my office. We are available on the Capitol Complex by phone, video chat, or if you want to make an in-person appointment to talk about what you're actually in business to do. And, if something about these three strategies may not apply to your business model, maybe we could have a conversation and identify bid opportunities for you that exist in state government that might be a little harder to find. So at the central purchasing level, we've got a pretty high level view of how all agencies buy things, and we're happy to connect you with that information and make you aware of what opportunities could be out there. So please feel free to reach out to us to talk about your business specifically. The final thing I'm going to talk about is the state's SWAM certification program that we also administer in my unit at the purchasing division. And SWAM certification with West Virginia is an 11-year-old program that designates businesses as up to three categories, and that's women-owned, minority-owned, and small businesses. And if you think you're eligible under any of those three categories, you can apply for SWAM certification and receive that 2-year designation from my agency. And what that could do for you, most importantly, is if you're a West Virginia company bidding in other states or with federal entities, being West Virginia SWAM certified could give you a competitive edge in those other states if they will reciprocate West Virginia SWAM certification. It's free to apply for SWAM certification, but right now there's not a lot of bid preferences in West Virginia for SWAM certified vendors, but it's incredibly valuable, and more businesses are applying for SWAM certification than ever because they can take it to other states that will recognize West Virginia SWAMs and then potentially give them something like an in-state vendor preference for West Virginia companies in those other states. If that reciprocation is there. Now, a couple of these questions that I'm going to get to. One of them is how long does it take for an award to be announced? That's going to vary, but I'm also going to leave that one for senior buyer Crystal Husted, since she is more intimately involved in that process than I am. But I did want to acknowledge that we do have a question for how long it takes for an award to be announced. So she's going to take over here in a minute and get to that. And then
We've gotten several questions.
I'm getting there.
Okay.
Another question I've got, what about veteran-owned businesses? There are opportunities for veteran-owned businesses. That is technically a federal certification. And, when I'm talking about West Virginia SWAM certification specifically, West Virginia Code 5A359, 5A359 only gives me three categories for the official SWAM certification, and that's the women-owned, minority-owned, and small businesses. But we can register you as a federal veteran-owned business on our registration documents. It's just not something that would go into specifically. Veteran-owned status, unfortunately, is not something that is addressed um, by the legislation that created the SWAM certification program. Um, and then a very good question I've got about West Virginia SWAM is what other states will reciprocate West Virginia SWAM certified businesses? And I have actually tried to create a list of other states that recognize our SWAMs and give them a preference. For the benefit of West Virginia's SWAM certified companies. And it may or may not surprise you that other states' purchasing divisions do not put the information out there readily about what out-of-state companies can come in and compete with their in-state companies. When I tried to create a list of what states reciprocated our SWAM status, I was not able to do it for a single state. Now, there are a few states that border us that, as I last understood it, they do reciprocate West Virginia SWAMs. And probably more importantly, I can tell you that you can also apply to be either SWAM or what some states call DBE certified if you first have your home state SWAM certification in hand. So, because what I'm trying to say is if you get your West Virginia SWAM certification status, you can then apply for other states' equivalent certification programs, whether they call it SWAM or DBE, and use our program as a stepping stone. And then if you have that status in another state, you're probably a lot closer to a competitive opportunity there. But unfortunately, I can't tell you what states will directly recognize it because they don't make it very, there's not information out there that I could find about what states let out-of-state companies swoop in and compete with their vendors. Okay, does SWAM help you receive different types of business funding? There's several different ways I can answer this question. I'm not sure if you're talking about set aside pieces of the West Virginia budget that might be set aside. Right now, the state of West Virginia does not set aside a certain amount of our budget to be awarded to SWAM certified business entities. I know the Commonwealth of Virginia, I think, sets aside something like 5% of their budget must be awarded to their equivalent of SWAM certified businesses. West Virginia does not do that. Now, if you're pursuing business funding, let's say from a federal agency, that federal business funding may say that you have to be state certified in wherever you're located. So, yeah, SWAM might be part of the eligibility if you're applying for like federal business funding. Hopefully that answers your question. And I think I'm caught up on all the questions right now.
We did get one about what about certified military spouse-owned enterprises?
Okay, federal military spouse owned businesses. I actually do not know anything about that, to be honest. My email address is at the end of this presentation. I'm happy to look at that in more detail if you can send something about that to me. I'm not ashamed to say I've never been asked that question, but I'm interested to know of what opportunities might be out there. And I actually have another question from a vendor now. Is there a way vendors can attach a capability statement to our vendor account so agencies can know more about our services? That's actually a really good question. There's not a way to attach something to your vendor self-service profile that's not already filled in. There is not a way in VSS for you to attach like free form documents as your to be saved in your vendor record with the state of West Virginia. But in my second strategy that I outlined, when you are looking for like maybe a handful of state agencies that you know would specifically need your goods and services, that's a very good thing to use as your introductory document to those procurement officers listed on our website. So even though you can't save it in your vendor record, but you can certainly use that in your self-marketing to state agencies that we give you the tools for in the second strategy. And oh my gosh, SWAM certification is blowing up this morning. I've got another question. I'm SWAM certified, but I'm struggling with how to market it or how it's prioritized. Let's have that conversation directly. In addition to what's outlined in that second strategy, that might be a little bit more detail, which I'm happy to have a more detailed conversation with any vendor about how to market yourself. But I can connect you with other state agencies with DBE related missions, things of that nature, especially if you're having problems with basically what's strategy 2 in this presentation. I'm happy to have that conversation with you directly, and I'm sorry if I've missed something that you've sent me in the past. If you are SWAM certified and you're doing what you described with trying to market yourself as that, we're happy to send, when you get your SWAM certification accepted, we send you a letter on our letterhead saying that you are SWAM certified in the one or more categories that you are. If you're preparing a solicitation response to the feds, to another state, we're happy to give you any documentation you need to make it known to that other state or federal entity that you are West Virginia SWAM certified, because we want to hear the success story that a West Virginia company took our SWAM certification to another state and brought home a contract. That would be great for us as well as you. So whatever you need to prove to somebody that you are SWAM certified with the purchasing division, we're happy to come up with that documentation for you to have in hand. And at this point, I'm going to turn this over to Senior Buyer Crystal Husted, and she's going to take you into the nitty gritty of the different procurement types that we use at the purchasing division and throughout the state of West Virginia, and how that would affect your responses to those different contract types. So thank you all so much, and thank you for the questions.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Crystal Husted. I'm going to start off by addressing the question earlier regarding how long it takes to be notified of an award. There is no specific timeline as to when a contract is awarded. It is on our end here at the purchasing division, it is completely dependent upon when the agency completes their evaluation and submits the recommendation to award. And that would also, that's dependent upon their workload, their funding. So I can't really give a specific timeline as to when a contract is awarded. And I hope that answers your question. So I'm going to discuss the purchasing process and what I do here at the purchasing division. Mark actually did a great job detailing how to find the solicitations in Oasis, in WV Oasis, vendor self-service. I'm going to discuss the different types of solicitations that are advertised. And he also discussed about the 4 letters that are in front of a project number. So you have request for quotations. There's 2 different types. There's the CRFQ or the ARFQ. If you see a CRFQ, you know that that project is estimated to be over $50,000 threshold. If you see the ARFQ, that is estimated to be under the $50,000 threshold, and that's going to be the CRFQ is actually advertised by the West Virginia Purchasing Division, and the ARFQ is going to be advertised by the state agency that is needing that product or service. Okay, so the CRFQ, that is going to be awarded by the West Virginia Purchasing Division. It is going to be awarded to the lowest vendor meeting all required specifications. Now, when you are going into vendor self-service in Oasis, you want to make sure that you download all of the documents in the attachment link. Once you go download your attachments, the key thing is to always read and review the instructions to bidders. That's where you're going to find who to submit questions to. You're also going to find out how you can submit your bid. And here at the West Virginia Purchasing Division, when we are soliciting a CRFQ, we have multiple ways that you may submit a bid. You can do it electronically through VSS. You can also fax it. You can mail, and you can drop it off in person between 8:15 and 4:30. Now, the West Virginia Purchasing Division, if we are soliciting the bid, if it is a CRFQ, we do not accept email bids under any circumstance. So even if it's 120 and you haven't gotten your bid in and you submit it to the buyer by email, we're not going to be able to accept that because we do not accept email bids here at the Purchasing Division. Now, I discussed going into vendor self-service. You can, if there's an addendum issued or any documents that are associated with that solicitation, you're going to find it under the hyperlink for that solicitation. You're going to find, like I said, the instructions to bidders. You're going to find the terms and conditions of the solicitation, the specifications. If there's a pricing page connected to it, any construction documents, which would be a bid bond or drawings, maps, anything that is associated with that solicitation is going to be attached in WV Oasis. Also, in the instructions to bidders, if there's going to be a pre-bid, it will also be listed in those instructions to vendors. So like I said, you want to make sure that you read those carefully. It's also going to talk about how to submit your questions and the technical question deadline for that solicitation. Now, if you have questions regarding a solicitation, especially if it's being advertised by the West Virginia Purchasing Division, you have to submit your questions in writing. I tell vendors this all the time. I bid on behalf of the state agency, so I'm not the product or service expert. So if you call me and ask me a question, I'm not going to be able to answer it. So you want to make sure that you submit your questions in writing to the buyer of that solicitation. Now, if you have a question and if it's just a simple question of like, how do I submit my bid, things like that, I can address this over the phone. But if it's actually questions regarding the specifications, you definitely need to submit those in writing. Now, if it is out to bid, you cannot have contact with the state agency that we are soliciting on behalf of. It is the blackout period, and that is by West Virginia Code of State Rules. So any communication regarding the solicitation must come through the buyer listed on the solicitation documents. So, even if it's a simple question, you cannot reach out to the agency. So make sure if it's a solicitation that you have questions about, that communication must come through the buyer listed on the solicitation documents. Going back to the different types of solicitation, we also have what we call the best value purchasing. That would be a request for proposal. So you would see, if it's in Oasis, you would see a CRFP. And that is a request for proposal that is being solicited by the West Virginia Purchasing Division. And those types of solicitations are awarded to the highest scoring vendor. We do not accept electronic submissions for an RFP because the cost is actually exposed if we allow vendors to submit electronically through WV Oasis. So that has to be a hard copy, either mailed or dropped off. And it is those types of a CRFP, sorry, getting a little tongue-tied. A CRFP has two different parts of the evaluation. There's a technical and a cost. The technical proposal is actually opened the day that is listed on the solicitation document. The cost is actually opened at a later date. So you want to make sure when you're submitting, if you are responding to an RFP or request for a proposal, that you put your proposals, like your cost and your technical, in two different envelopes and make sure that they are labeled, because the cost is actually opened at a later date. And when we are doing the cost opening, we will notify you by an emailed letter letting you know that it's going to be opened on this specific date, and then it's going to be posted on the West Virginia Purchasing Division's website. Going back to the types of solicitations, we also will have what we call an expression of interest, and this is for architectural and engineering services. And this is also a best value procurement. It is it's evaluated on qualifications and experience, and it's ranked by the best value committee selected at the agency level. So you have a committee at the agency that is actually reviewing the expressions of interest. And it is awarded to the highest ranked vendors, and then that vendor will enter into negotiations, and that's how the pricing is determined.
And we do have a question. Is the technical part the actual proposal?
Yes. So you have the technical, and that's what the technical is, what you're evaluated on both parts, but the bulk of the evaluation is on the technical portion, if that makes sense. You do get it's usually a 70-30 split. So 70% is your technical and 30% is your cost. All right, I do want to go back to the expressions of interest and do a small reminder. Like the blackout period with a request for quotation, a blackout period, vendors cannot have contact with either the state agency or the architectural engineering firm with an expression of interest. So that would also fall into the blackout period. Now, the agency can also, there's two types of EOIs, expressions of interest. There's an agency level expression of interest, and then there's a central, which would come through the West Virginia Purchasing Division expression of interest. Now, if it's an agency level, they might have a different process as far as how to submit a response to that. So you want to make sure that you read the solicitation documents. For an expression of interest that is being advertised by the West Virginia Purchasing Division, you can submit your responses by mail, fax, drop it off in person. Now, with an expression of interest, you can submit those electronically through WVOASIS. Once again, an email response through the Purchasing Division will not be accepted. And then we have a request for information, which is a CRFI. Now, these are only used for informational purposes. So we're it's market research. The agency, they have a need for a product or service, but they're having trouble maybe writing up the specifications for it. So this is their form of doing market research. Now, with an request for information, no award is issued. Like I said, it's just basically for market research. We will also post those on our website on the West Virginia Purchasing Division's website on the bids received page. So they will also be, so if you submit an RFI and you wanted to see what other vendors submitted, those are listed on the Purchasing Division website as well. Now, if you are submitting a bid, you want to make sure that you carefully review how to submit your bid, where to submit your bid, the closing date. You also want to make sure that you've met all the requirements that are listed in the specifications and terms and conditions. You'll also want to make sure that anything that requires a notary seal has been notarized, and you also want to make sure that you sign and date everything that requires a signature. You'll also want to look through your terms and conditions, especially on review section 8 for any insurance requirements. And the state of West Virginia will, just every solicitation that we do will always require commercial general liability insurance. The amount of coverage may vary, but you want to make sure that you review section 8 to see all of the insurance requirements for that particular solicitation. Now, I mentioned earlier a bid bond. If that solicitation has a bid bond requirement, you must submit your bid bond with your bid. We cannot accept a bid bond after the bid opening. So you want to make sure if that is a requirement, then you have to submit your bid bond with your bid. We also have vendor preference forms that must be submitted with your bid. Vendor preference forms, it's only applicable if to certain products goods and services. So you want to make sure that you review section 15 through 16 of vendors submitting bids. So that's going to be in the instructions to vendors. Other documents that should be submitted with the bid and will be required prior to the award is going to be the addendum acknowledgement form. So if there was any addendums that were issued during the solicitation, you want to make sure that you that will be required before your before award. Any licenses or certifications, so if there was a contractor's license that was required, then that will also need to be provided prior to award. A drug-free workplace affidavit, if that, and the subcontractor list, if those were requirements, we'll also need those prior to award. All of these should be submitted with your bid because it helps speed along the award process. But these are things that we can gather prior to the award. Now, this is a screenshot of how to submit your bid. You would upload all the required documents. You want to make sure that you you've signed everything, included an email address, because we now communicate basically through email. Once we award a contract, or if we have any questions, or if we need to request any documents, we do that by email. So make sure that on your bid that you complete any sections that ask for an email address. Bids must be received by the scheduled date and time. So if the bid opening is 4/27 at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, you must have your bid in by 1:30. We cannot accept late bids under any circumstance. I've had vendors who have faxed their bid in, but they started it at like 1:25 and it wasn't completed until 1:32. We cannot accept that. That is considered a late bid because it has to be submitted by 1:30. Now, if it is, bid proceedings may vary. If the solicitation begins with an A, that is, like we have discussed earlier, that is for a state agency soliciting for purchases that are under that $50,000 limit. If that solicitation begins with an A, they may have a different process as far as submitting bids. So you want to make sure that you read through those solicitations carefully. If it is a C, that's it's going to be submitted through the West Virginia Purchasing Division. So that would be the fax, dropping off in person, mail, through WB Oasis. So an agency might have a different process as far as accepting bids than the West Virginia Purchasing Division. Like I said, responses to anything with the state, I'm sorry, getting tongue tied, the purchasing division. It, like I said, can be submitted electronically through vendor self-service, faxed to 558-3970, and paper bids that they can be mailed or dropped off in person. And like I discussed earlier, fax bids must be completed, the transaction must be completed by 1:30. Anything after that 1:30 will be considered a late bid and will be disqualified. So if you're bidding on something and you're planning on faxing your bid in, make sure that you start it as soon as possible. Because the closer to bid opening, the more more vendors are trying to fax their bids in. So make sure if you're going to be responding by fax, to begin as early as possible. After the bid opening, you may review all the bids that are received on the West Virginia Purchasing Division website. And here's the link. More than likely, if the bid opening is today, they will be on the West Virginia Purchasing Division's website by the close of business and today, no later than tomorrow. So they're usually on there pretty quickly. Now, once the bids have opened, that's when the evaluation process begins. If it is if it's something that has been solicited by the West Virginia Purchasing Division, the agency that we are buying on behalf of, so say if it's DNR or DEP, they're going to download the bids, and then that's when they're going to begin their evaluation. They're going to evaluate to make sure that all the mandatory specifications have been met. The award recommendation, once they've completed, will be submitted to the West Virginia Purchasing Division buyer. And then that's when, if it's my agency, that's when I'll do my review to make sure that the vendor has met all the required mandatories. And then after it's been evaluated, that's when we'll process the award. Now, there is mandatory registration requirements prior to award. All vendors have to be registered with the West Virginia Secretary of State's office, the West Virginia Tax Department, Insurance Commission, and as Mark stated earlier, you have to complete your registration in the West Virginia Purchasing Division, with the West Virginia Purchasing Division through WV Oasis. Once an award has been made, I can speak to how we notify vendors here at the West Virginia Purchasing Division. So if it is a CRFQ, a CRFP, a CEOI, we actually, once the contract has been finalized, we send out a letter notification to all vendors who have participated in that solicitation, and it will tell you who was awarded and where you can actually find the award documents. Now, once an award has been made, that's when the blackout period has actually been lifted and contact between the agency and the vendors may begin. All right, so we actually have protest procedures too. If you feel that the specifications of a solicitation are skewed to one particular vendor or one particular brand, you actually may file a protest of those specifications, but it has to be within 5 days prior to the bid opening, and you would submit that to the West Virginia Purchasing Division's director. We also have a protest of award. If you feel, that the awarded vendor didn't meet the mandatory requirements and you feel that you should be awarded that contract, you may also protest an award, and that actually has to be submitted within 5 days after the award of the purchase order. And you would also submit that to the West Virginia Purchasing Director. Change orders are any modification to a contract. Some examples would be a renewal, an extension, cancellation. If it is a renewal or say a notice to proceed for a construction contract, no work can be done until that change order is finalized. Now, if the agency change orders they may vary from the West Virginia Purchasing Division. So if it's an agency AMA or APO, an AMA would be an open-end contract with the agency. An APO, which is an agency purchase order, that's typically a one-time purchase that the agency has made. If it is awarded through the West Virginia Purchasing Division, you would see contract CMA, which is a central master agreement, and that's an open-end contract for an agency. And then we have the central purchase, central purchase order, which is a one-time purchase that we have bid out and awarded for the agency. A change order is prepared by an agency. If it is a CMA or a CPO, the agency will prepare it. They submit it to us here at the Purchasing Division. We review it, we process it, and then it goes to the Attorney General's office for approval, and then it's encumbered, and that's when the work can begin. So a few things to remember. The purchasing, if you are submitting your bid to the West Virginia Purchasing Division, we cannot accept late bids. Formal acquisitions, vendor may not communicate with state agencies regarding a specific solicitation. So that was what we refer to as the blackout period. So all questions must be submitted in writing to the buyer listed on the solicitation documents. We do encourage vendors to submit all required documentation with their bid, just so we can get to the award, we can get through the award process quicker. You'll always want to make sure that you review the purchasing and the agency master terms and conditions for a good understanding of all requirements. And we actually have the links to both of those right below. Vendor performance. So if you've gotten a contract and there's issues between performance or product delays with the agency, you want to make sure that you communicate with the agency. The agency will document all the communications made with you as far as trying to resolve any issues. If multiple attempts to resolve the issue has failed, the agency will then forward all of the communications to the West Virginia Purchasing Division for further action, and that may file a vendor performance evaluation if it's necessary. All right, so here is the references. We have the Vendor Resource Center at the West Virginia Purchasing Division.gov link. We also have West Virginia Purchasing Division Transparency. The awarded contract, central contracts, that's a link that shows you all contracts that are awarded by the West Virginia Purchasing Division. We also have the procurement officer listing, West Virginia Purchasing Division, West Virginia Purchasing WV Oasis procurement section, and the WV Oasis ERP board and help desk link. And I'm going to turn it back over to Mark Totten.
All right, everybody, I'm going to bring it home this morning. There's been a lot of good conversation about small women and minority-owned business certification. I'm happy to extend that beyond this webinar if needed. If needed, and from time to time, we communicate with the U.S. Small Business Administration Department, and we're happy to collaborate with them if there's ever anything that needs to be, developed by the West Virginia Purchasing Division to help you. Just to give a rundown of my, section this morning, most of my time was spent on the strategy regarding the purchasing bulletin. I just want you all to be aware of the opportunities that are out there. Whether or not you decide to take the time to respond to a solicitation is 100% fine, but you all don't have the freedom to make that decision if you're not aware of all the opportunities that are out there in our 55 counties. So so much of my efforts this morning is to just make you aware of all the opportunities out there above and below 50,000, advertised in the bulletin and with our statewide contracts, just so you can decide to what level you're going to compete for business with West Virginia. Absolutely learn what agencies need. There's a tremendous amount of information out there, and there's tools to connect you with that information. And I'm happy to elaborate more about vendor registration, about SWAM, about the different tools you can use in the vendor self-service portal. By all means, make a call, make an appointment with us at the purchasing division. My vendor registration office, you can email directly with questions if you're not able to get a hold of Crystal Husted or myself. The vendor registration office at the purchasing division is here to make sure that you have a lay of the land with state government procurement. So that's how I'm going to leave it this morning. And I'm going to turn to our MC, Courtney Johnson, to see to what extent we have this morning to open this up to final questions for Crystal and myself. So I'm going to turn this over to Courtney.
We can stay on for another minute or so if anybody has any questions. We did have one from earlier that I told you we were going to email. Is GCL insurance still required if the services are going to be provided virtually?
Yes.
Yes, Crystal and responded, yes, it's still required if the services will be provided virtually.
So while we wait for final questions to come into the chat box, I really want to thank everybody for attending this morning. I'm grateful for the time you all took. My goal this morning was to make you aware of the information and how to best use your time to compete for state of West Virginia business. I know that you all are not in business to learn state government or to fill out documentation from state government. So I hope that what we did gave you some ideas on how to make the best use of your time when it comes to competing and submitting bids to the state, which we definitely want you to do. We want as many vendors as possible to bid on as many projects as possible. So hopefully we got you a little bit closer to doing that in the most efficient amount of time.
We will send a survey this afternoon. We do appreciate you taking a moment to fill that out. And we'll go ahead and wrap this up. We don't have any other questions, so please feel free to contact us if you think of something later. Thanks, everybody, for participating. Have a great rest of the day.